Good evening, everyone. Let's try that one more time. Good evening, everyone. Awesome. You're going to be in for a show tonight, so thank you so much for being here. My name is Famous Harrison. I'm the president of Wenatchee Valley College. On behalf of our board of trustees, our esteemed faculty and staff, our amazing students, and everyone that loves not only the college, but North Central Washington. We're just honored to have you here tonight. Again, this is going to be an exciting evening. I want to provide more, but Marcine is looking at me and telling me I'm not doing the introduction and I'm not doing the land acknowledgement. But anyway, it's going to be a wonderful evening, and thank you so much for being here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Marcine, the head of communications at Wenatchee Valley College. Welcome to WVC Speaks. This is a speaker series that we brought back before COVID. It used to happen almost every year, and so we're really excited to feature one of our very own faculty members tonight. You'll hear a little bit more about her in a moment. Before we begin, we just want to start with a land acknowledgement. Wenatchee Valley College respectfully acknowledges that the Wenatchee and Omak campuses reside on the traditional territories of the Wenatchee and the Okanagan people. The traditional territories of the Colville tribes extends across Washington and into portions of the British Columbia, Oregon, and Idaho. The Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation includes the Lakes, Colville, Okanagan, Moses Columbia, Wenatchee, Entiat, Chelan, Methow, Nispelem, Sanpoil, Chief Joseph Band of the Nez Perce, and the Palouse Indians. Consistent with our commitment to diversity and inclusion, the college works towards building relationships with the Colville tribes through our academic pursuits, partnerships, recognition, community service, and enrollment efforts. So now I would love to introduce the head of our art department, Scott Bailey.
Thank you, Marcy. Hi, welcome to my lair, the MAC. I feel really lucky to be able to teach in here, and I'm honored to be able to introduce Sarah this evening. Just before I do that, I want to say that the really excellent exhibition that's in the gallery right now is in its last 24 hours. So if you want to see it, now's your chance. And also feel free to explore. I think the studios should be open, and there's lots of good student work in the hallways, so please do that. Sarah Sprouse is a ceramic artist, an educator, an art historian, who attended the University of Montana and Azusa Pacific University in California, earning an MA in art history and an MFA in ceramics. In addition to running our ceramics program here at WVC, she also serves as the executive director of the Grunewald Guild in Plain. Sarah has presented lectures on ceramics history widely, including recently in Chicago and in Cambridge, England. She will soon participate in artist residencies in Mexico and Japan. Her creative work, which reflects deep engagement with materiality and storytelling, can be found in the permanent collections of the University of Montana, the City of Spokane, Edmonds College, and others. She will hold a solo exhibition of her work in Spokane and also in the Mac Gallery. I'm making it official tonight, in the coming year. Sarah began teaching the full sequence of ceramics classes here at WVC in 2024, accepting the challenging task of taking over our storied program when Ruth Allen retired after 4 decades with us. She's very effectively putting her stamp on the program, helping students approach ceramics with a sense of experimentation and playfulness. We're proud to have her on our staff and grateful that she's willing to share her knowledge with us tonight. Please join me in welcoming Sarah Sprouse as she presents Modern Craftsmen, Women, Ceramics, and Community in the Pacific Northwest.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate some. Thank you. Awesome. Wow, thank you all for coming and welcome. I'm so excited to share about ceramic history this Thursday evening. So tonight we'll explore modern craftsmen, women, ceramics, and community, with a specific focus on the West Coast. We won't be going over as much Northwest art as I would like due to time purposes, but please come take my class if you would like to learn more. First, for those of you new to ceramic history, I want to introduce you to the artistic landscape of the mid-century. In this presentation, I will refer to modernism or modern art as artwork created in the post-war era after World War II from the 1930s to the 1970s. During this time, three major cultural shifts occurred in the art world and one rather dramatic and drastic change in craft. First, after World War II, we had the introduction of the GI Bill, which allowed more folks to enter back into higher education and art. More on this soon. Second, the establishment of a modern art canon began in the Western world, with abstract American art at the center. Artists such as Mark Rothko, Jackson Pollock, and Helen Frankenthaler were widely circulating in the art world and beyond. The art bubble popped in the US due to intentional abstract expressionism propaganda to combat the Cold War, but that is a topic for a different lecture. Perhaps more importantly, an art critic and curator, Clement Greenberg, known as the critic who made modern art, brought forward a very specific lens in which to view and engage with art. Greenberg was a critic, but he didn't just interpret art. He shaped the conversation around it, and he implemented his ideas in cultural and artistic institutions in the US and beyond. Clement Greenberg's reputation as the most powerful art critic in mid-20th century America was cemented by his unwavering support for abstract expressionism. In his view, this movement represented the pinnacle of modernism, specifically painting, and it was a continuation of a historical arc that began with the likes of Manet, moved through Cézanne, and culminated in the large-scale, non-representational canvases emerging from New York studios. At the core of Greenberg's critical philosophy was the concept of formalism. He believed that great art should focus on its medium-specific qualities. For painting, that meant emphasizing flatness, color, and surface rather than illusion or narrative. To Greenberg, the best paintings didn't pretend to be anything other than paint on canvas. They were self-contained, self-referential, and unapologetically abstract. This lens gave rise to what many now call the Greenbergian canon, a list of artists he championed as the true inheritors of modernism. Chief among them was Jackson Pollock, seen here, whom Greenberg described as, quote, the greatest painter this country has produced, unquote. Others included Barnett Newman, Mark Rothko, and Clifford Still, painters who rejected figuration in favor of large-scale, emotionally intense abstractions. Greenberg's essays didn't just praise these artists, they offered a framework for understanding them. His writing helped shape the public and institutional response to modern art, reinforcing the belief that abstraction was not only valid, but necessary for the continued evolution of painting. By the 1950s, Greenberg's influence extended well beyond print. Museums and collections, and even artists began to anticipate or cater to his aesthetic preferences. He became a kind of gatekeeper, defining what counted as serious or, quote, advanced, unquote, art. For some, he was a visionary. For others, a dogmatist. Either way, his impact was undeniable and changed the art world forever. Greenberg established painting, specifically American abstract expressionism, as the epicenter of modern art. The cultural lens in which we view art today can be traced back to his philosophies. And you may wonder why or how can a single person have such an impact? Greenberg went on to work with the Museum of Modern Art in New York as a curator. The museum has deeply rooted their collection, historical timeline, and exhibition designs in his ideas. And this is not an extreme opinion. The MoMA and other institutions now consider our art historical timeline before and after modern art because of this rhetoric. But isn't this a lecture on ceramic history? Why are we spending so much time talking about abstract paintings? Because this is the context in which ceramics is studied, considered, and activated. The third critical shift in the mid-century, and the most critical to our topic tonight, was the emergence and overcoming of the craft versus fine art debate. We will explore this conversation later in our time this evening, and before I do so, I want to be clear about the augmentation of ceramics in the modern art canon. Ceramic history has always been an oral tradition. It is rare, and I mean rare, to find a class on the subject. We have fewer books, exhibition spaces, and archival literature on the development of the medium. Yet ceramics is one of the oldest and most functional forms of art. The earliest recorded fingerprints are impressions preserved and found in clay. Just saying that out loud brings tears to my eyes. The oldest and first records of our humanness are captured in clay. The historical understanding of ceramics is confusing due to the spectrum in which it encompasses. Is ceramic history anthropological or artistic? When you open a global history book, chances are you will find a long chapter or two on an ancient civilization. You'll see fragmented pots, beads, and early tools made out of clay. How is it possible, then, that the tradition and history of ceramics is so often not considered? To further this disconnect, I want to briefly discuss how contemporary ceramics is booming. Thanks to social media platforms, especially TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, there are more hobby potters and ceramic artists than ever. On the first day of class every quarter, I ask students what brought them to this class, and most of them answer they were inspired by a video they saw online. The cost of handmade ceramics is higher than ever. For some artists, they sell work online for over $90 a mug and sell out within minutes of updating their online store. I'm not sure if you've ever participated in that type of cult following where you try to buy something in 30 seconds and it's sold out. Happens a lot with ceramic mugs in particular. To this end, community ceramic studios are popping up everywhere with full wait lists. When I moved to Seattle a few years ago, I was very excited to learn of some new studios coming about, and I put myself on their list, and it was over a year before I even was invited to become a member. Luckily for us, in the greater Wenatchee Valley, we have new studios and ceramic spaces opening up. Studios such as Clayworks, the Mud Room, and even at my own organization, the Grunwald Guild, we continue to see a rise in interest in the medium. For some reason, clay feels more accessible today than before, and feels psychologically accessible to a greater variety of people than other mediums like painting or sculpture. Contemporary ceramics is experiencing a cultural phenomenon, yet our history remains inaccessible or incomplete. Through this discussion, I don't want you to think I'm saying no one is talking about ceramic history, nor do I want you to think that I hate painting and abstract expressionism. I entered the field as a painter, and I deeply love those things. But what I want to acknowledge is that there's a huge divide and disconnect in our American art landscape due to an intentional focus on 2D work, specifically paintings, and the American ethos of what is and isn't modern art. Okay, are you still with me through all of that? Let's consider a new study of sculpture in our American consciousness. I want to try a little exercise. I invite you to close your eyes. You don't have to. Now imagine you're in a gallery or a museum space. Perhaps it's the MoMA or Seattle Art Museum or even the Mac Gallery space here on campus. How do you enter the space? What is around you? Where are you looking? Is it the floor, the ceiling, the wall? What artwork comes to mind when you think of art? Take one more moment in your imaginative gallery, then come back to this lecture space. What came forward? Did anyone picture paintings? Perhaps installation or sculpture? Chances are, and this may not be the case for you, you envisioned work on the wall. If you visualize sculpture, amazing. You don't have to stay for the rest of this talk. I kid, please stay. And hopefully I didn't sway your bias into imagining sculpture. Why do we do this exercise? Most of us are not aware of how we approach a gallery space, but follow the curated pattern of the room and ultimately start with the artworks on the wall. Even if you're a wall text person, you will scan the room you're entering, starting with the walls first. As a viewer, we have become trained to give value to 2D works over 3D works. This may be your first time hearing about the craft versus fine art debate, and if so, welcome. But it is still a contentious conversation in the art world. Lots of progress has been made to bridge this debate, but our museums, our galleries, our schools will reflect this. Still, and they still value, even if just inherently, 2D works over 3D works. And even here, regardless of the reasons, the ceramic studio is the only one separated from the rest of the art spaces on campus. 95% of people who visit a gallery or museum space don't interact with the sculptural works in the room. Most don't even notice the sculptural works. Sometimes this is due to the architecture of the space. Most times we are just unaware. In contemporary spaces, more sculptural works exist, more installations, more interactive pieces. Chances are, if you are engaging with 3D works, it's contemporary. So with this information, modern ceramics is already up against a pretty big discrepancy. They are fighting to have their artwork recognized as fine art and not just as craft, and they are also fighting to have their work seen and taken seriously by viewers. There have been a few studies over the past 20 years about how long we, as viewers, engage with a singular work of art. In 2001, Professors Lisa Smith and Jeffrey Smith of the University of Otago released a study conducted at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where they observed, on average, a visitor spent 17 seconds looking at an artwork, specifically painting. In 2025, the same research revealed, on average, a visitor spends 8 seconds looking at a work of art. And for sculptural works, that time is even less. Sculptural works often disappear, as I mentioned before, into the architecture of the space. But also, as viewers, we are not conditioned to interact with sculpture. It is more challenging for our brains to engage with meaning-making, even though, as physical beings, we interact with 3D objects all the time. Let's consider how this is playing out in our contemporary art landscape. In 2019, the MoMA, or the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, modified their Gallery 501. What looks like a small change was a critical and controversial shift. Gallery 501 is the epicenter of MoMA. It is the entry point into the modern art canon. If you follow the pathways of the museum, all paths will lead you back to 501. In this singular room, you will find Van Gogh's Starry Night, Henry Rousseau's The Sleeping Gypsy, and Paul Cézanne's The Bathers. The gallery space's wall text talks about 19th century innovators, and it's a buzzy gallery room basically full of 19th century's greatest artistic hits. So then what was controversial? In 2019, MoMA curators moved 6 ceramic works by American potter George Orr from the design wing to Gallery 501. George Orr is considered one of the pioneering ceramic artists of the modern era. When viewed today, Orr's works look like it could have been made last week. His design sensibility, fluid glazing, and gestural form are common explorations for potters. And without being too reductive, many of his works look like pots created by my students in the early stages of their time in their first quarter in our studio across the lawn. Why then would MoMA be interested in these pieces, and what makes them valuable enough to share the same gallery space as Starry Night? George Orr's works marked a major turn in ceramic production. He was one of the first studio potters, or potters who made art for art's sake, rather than for the industrial era. Orr was an artist. His work is innovative and timeless. I'm curious if anyone in this room even considered what 19th century ceramics has looked like. I know prior to knowing about George Orr, I did not. So this is really interesting to me, but I hope it's also interesting to you, that of all the art objects, the curators at MoMA brought ceramics into the gallery space. This was the first time a major institution had incorporated ceramics into such a space and into such a narrative, which was truly mind-blowing for craft. Not only were Orr's works esteemed at the same caliber as paintings like Starry Night, but they were also framed and discussed as art objects, rather than simply functional craftwares. Again, mind-blowing. However, since then, these works have been moved back to the design wing. Due to the busyness of the gallery space, the visitors visiting with just the intent of getting selfies with famous paintings, or perhaps the design of the room, visitors were not engaging with Orr's work. Through analysis of gallery footage, the curators found visitors ignored altogether the case of Orr's pottery, even though it's literally in the middle of the room. Visitors would, at best, glimpse inside and move on in less than 3 seconds, or they'd lean on the case, or at worst, they would prop up their phone or their device to take a photo and use the case as a tripod to get better photographs of Starry Night and the paintings in the room. Shifting Orr's work opened an interesting dialogue about the invisibility of modern ceramics, and also our consideration of what is art versus design. Perhaps you have noticed, this lecture is intended to be one about women in ceramics, and I have spent at least 1/3 of this lecture discussing the historical trends of men. Let's take a moment to acknowledge this. It has taken at least 1/3 of this lecture to situate ourselves in the context of American ceramics. This is how removed ceramic history is from the canon of modern art. The history of modern American ceramics has long been narrated through a familiar art. A medium once confined to craft traditions is, quote, elevated, unquote, into the realm of fine art through the radical interventions of a small group of male artists working in the post-World War II period. Figures such as Peter Volkos and John Mason are frequently positioned as central protagonists in this transformation, credited with redefining clay as sculptural and also as an expressive medium aligned with the ambitions of modern art. Just as with abstract expressionism, women artists are compared to the leading male players in their field. Rather than Pollock and Rothko, we have Volkos and Mason in this ceramic sphere. This narrative, while influential, is incomplete. It obscures a broader and more complex field of activity, one in which women ceramicists played a critical and generative role in shaping the material, conceptual, and communal dimensions of modern ceramics. Unlike other visual mediums in the post-war era, ceramics provided space for women artists to create outside of previously established expectations of artists, due to the field's increasing accessibility to women and the unprecedented shift from production pottery, that is, industrial production of dishware and home goods, to studio development, that is, private art practices and more sculpturally focused works. As the United States began emerging as a modern art hub, academic institutions began expanding their ceramics programs and increased their opportunities for women, at a time where women were virtually excluded from modernist art practices such as painting and sculpture. Though the narrative of modern ceramics primarily discusses the evolution of the field from craft to sculpture by way of male artists, the field was heavily influenced by women who occupied community-based roles, which kept them in relatively less recognized professional positions than their male colleagues. In the modern era, ceramics was just as explorative, gestural, and expansive as other mediums. Our history is less known due to a cultural investment in what was deemed modern, such as painting or sculpture, as we've thoroughly discussed, but also furniture, architecture, and Bauhaus craft expressions such as weaving. Ceramics did not enter our modern consciousness until the work of Peter Volkos, who echoes the ethos of abstract expressionism, was identified in such a way. Once the argument was made that ceramics could be considered sculptural rather than craft, our society deemed it worthy of consideration. This is the bar ceramics has had to argue for. Anything less than monumental sculptures was not interesting. But what about all the modern craftsmen exploring the plasticity of clay and the craft potters building new kiln models and glaze chemistry? Aren't they equally modern? And what about the women artists exploring and expanding the power of pedagogical inquiry in and outside of the studio? Ceramics provided an opportunity for women to make a living as full-time studio potters, assistants, and teachers. Rather than canonization, many women achieved self-sufficiency. Often this came in the form of a teaching position rather than an exhibition record. This is a major distinction from other fields. The modern art period is dominated by male artists. Men occupied what was viewed as more prestigious and career-building roles, such as curators, coveted professional artists, architects, and academics. Modern ceramic artist Betty Woodman notes she grew up in a time when few women artists were professionals, and even fewer were professional potters, except those in teaching positions. Though Woodman held a teaching position for 20 years, she does not view herself as a great mentor within the field of ceramics compared to her male colleagues. Instead, she viewed her time as a teacher of ceramics as a way for her to share her enjoyment for making pots and to foster space for others to learn how to see. She states, quote, "I certainly am not aware of having started a school or having disciples. I did make friends and met people I respect, people with whom I can intelligently discuss and argue about the things for which I care passionately," unquote. Woodman's philosophical approach to making ceramics is a crucial factor that separates her from her male colleagues, and instead speaks to her alignment with other craftswomen, an artist whose contribution to the field has gone largely unnoticed. Women ceramicists such as Woodman in the mid-century revealed how ceramics is not a discipline just rooted in technical and individual achievement, but play, collaboration, and experimentation. These women often practice in community-based studios and spaces that emphasize experimentation, and where there was no concern for distinguishing high from low art or craft from fine art. Woodman herself has said she has no interest in this distinction. And for reference, Betty Woodman was the subject of the first solo exhibition or retrospective by a living woman artist at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York in 2006. So let's take a moment to let that sink in. The first living woman artist to hold an exhibition at the Met was in 2006, and she was a ceramic artist. The ceramic field in the mid-century was not only dominated by male artists, yet the scholarship of the field continues to prioritize and celebrate the contribution of male artists as this narrative parallels the canonized evolution of modern art. And because these women did not participate in the canonized perpetuation of high versus low art, their work illustrates it is possible to create work outside of such definitions. In the 1950s, the value of the ceramic medium began to shift in the United States through what art historians call the clay revolution, or the projection of ceramics into the realm of high art, under the direction of ceramic artist Peter Volkos, seen here. Volkos is recognized as the champion of modern ceramics due largely to his ability to subvert the traditional expectations attached to ceramics and his large-scale works that were no longer a form of craft vessels, but obviously sculptural. It is this distinction that many believe launched the ceramic medium debate from craft to fine art. It is undeniable that Volkos helped to usher ceramics into the modern art sphere. The notion of Volkos solely challenging the boundary of fine art and craft, as identified by the canon, minimizes the cultural ideals and practices that were at play within modern ceramics. Ceramics was part of the larger shift to redefine new and old materials that had previously been peripheral to, quote, fine art conceptions of sculpture, unquote, but under this new approach to making were limitless in their meaning-making capabilities. While the myth and ethos of Peter Volkos celebrates his successful elevation of the ceramic medium, the traditional narrative minimizes the role and influence of women ceramic artists who trained and influenced him. It also minimizes the role of women art critics in shaping Volkos' career. Specifically, Rose Slivka, whose essay, The New Ceramic Presence, cemented Volkos' influence as a pioneer and leader of modern ceramics, and Rosalind Krauss, who celebrated Volkos' sculptural forms in her essay, Sculpture in the Expanded Field. Though peripheral, ceramics as a medium had a major following, even in the mid-century. The journal Craft Horizons played a critical role in outlining and closing the fine art versus craft debate. Rose Slivka, a writer and art critic for Craft Horizons, changed the field forever in her article discussing Volkos' work, and most notably his rocking pot. That is certainly not functional. In her article, Slivka positioned Volkos' work as fine art and undeniable sculpture. Where art critic Clement Greenberg set the stage for modernism, Rose Slivka articulated the voice of a craft generation. The conversation around craft versus fine art has changed a lot in contemporary scholarship, But in this era, it was really just beginning. And the idea of, quote, elevating, unquote, the ceramic medium from craft to fine art or sculpture was a major consideration of the field, due largely to this essay and the many of her articles. Slivka further shaped Volkow's career in 1977 when she curated his first retrospective at the Museum of Contemporary Craft in New York and published the first monograph of his work. Modern women ceramicists did far more for the medium than fill in creative gaps. They established residencies, exhibitions, and creative partnerships in a time where their male colleagues sought solely to operate at the same caliber and recognition as artists working in paint and two-dimensionality. For example, in 1972, the Ceramic National was canceled and dispersed due to the lack of internal support from jurors and leading male ceramic artists, including Volkos, who was a juror. Essentially, in 1972, Volkos, head of the juror of the Ceramic National, stated there was not strong enough work by exhibiting artists to host the exhibition. In an extreme decision, he and the jurors Jeff Schlanger and Robert Turner determined they could not find quality works out of a pool of over 4,000 submissions. Their refusal to participate as jurors and artists led to the cancellation of the Ceramics National in 1972 and the eventual termination of the entire program. Because why have an exhibition if the work isn't good? This left a gap in showcasing new ceramic work. So in 1974, ceramic artist Margot Hudo established an exhibition series titled New Works in Clay in partnership with Syracuse University and the Everson Museum. New Works in Clay provided an opportunity to propel the field forward that was championed by women. Hudo's program and the New Works in Clay exhibition speaks to the role of women in bringing forward new ideas and spaces for ceramic art that was not gendered or deemed other, but a powerful creative space that exemplified the ideas of modern art. Hudo's program opened the door for new ceramic residencies and collaborative programs where artists such as Betty Woodman could participate. And here she is seen with a collaborative work made during one of those residencies with artist Joyce Kozloff. So far, we've heard a lot about New York and its impact on the art world. But what about the West Coast? In the 1950s, California's ceramic scene cracked wide open, literally. Volkos began slicing and stacking and puncturing clay in ways that shocked traditionalists. His towering abstract stoneware forms weren't meant to be used, they were meant to be felt. Through his faculty position at the University of California, Berkeley, Volkos led a new generation of artists who didn't see clay as craft. They saw it as sculpture. Alongside others in the California clay movement, Viola Frey, Rudy Artuo, and John Mason, he blurred the line between ceramics and expressionism. For many craft historians, this is where clay on the West Coast begins. However, 20 years prior, Marguerite Wildenhain, a student of the Bauhaus and the first woman to be named master potter in Germany, carried the modernist design principles of Europe into the hills of Northern California. There she is. After fleeing Nazi Germany, she founded Pond Farm, a ceramic school and artist colony nestled among redwoods. There, Wildenhain taught not just form and technique, but a deeply ethical, almost spiritual approach to making. Quote, hands in service of the mind, unquote, she'd say, but always with humility before the material. Her pots were modest, hand-thrown, and purposeful, often left unglazed or with simple lines incised. But their quiet presence spoke volumes. She believed every curve and proportion should not be felt. It should not be forced. Or it should be felt, that's what I thought, but not forced. It wasn't about decoration, but about meaning through making. Wildenhain's legacy lives on not only in museum collections, but in the hundreds of potters she shaped through quiet instruction and steady example. She made studio pottery an act of daily intention and made the Bauhaus breathe across oceans. Wildenhain's teaching and Pond Farm as a studio speak to the powerful community-centric approach many women ceramic artists sought in the mid-century. Let's consider Marguerite Wildenhain's milk pitcher from 1923, made in the long-standing tradition of sturdy German domestic vessels. Made of stoneware, the open vessel is a molted cobalt blue. made uneven by small pits on the surface, a trademark of salt glazing. If you're unfamiliar with salt glazing, salt is thrown into the kiln during the firing process to react with the silica and the clay body in order to produce a unique textured surface and coloration. Wildenhain used this technique on her pot in order to create a rougher exterior for the hands to grasp onto to prevent slipping when using it. Produced during the years at the Weimar Bauhaus, Wildenhain was the only woman at Dornberg. According to Wildenhain, there were 5 students in 1920, that first year of the workshop, but never more than 7. This is an important note because it speaks to the relationship of ceramics within the Bauhaus movement. Amongst other visual mediums, ceramics is once again one of the least popular, as it was considered, unquote, less intellectual, unquote. Milk Pitcher was the only Bauhaus-era work that accompanied Wildenhain to the United States when she arrived as a refugee in 1940. And the following year, she became a leading functional potter who was well regarded for her stoneware pots, but notorious for her opinions, including a public rebuke of Bernard Leach in Craft Horizons' 1953 issue. Craft Horizons was the most notable ceramic publication of its time and was the same publication that launched Peter Volkos's career, whom we've talked much about. Leach was viewed as the founding father of modern ceramics and is considered a pioneer of the field, one who helped bring modern ceramics from Britain to America. Leach, however, believed American potters were not very talented or accomplished, arguing they did not have their own style. Wildenhain defended her adopted homeland and even went so far as to reject an award from the American Craft Council in 1922. The ACC wanted to recognize and honor her career-long contributions to the field. In her rejection letter, she wrote, quote, "I detest what the ACC has been standing for the last 20 years or so. Their point of view toward the crafts and art, their horrible magazine, their museum, etc. So forget me as a prospective fellow," unquote. Remember, she is known for her opinions. From 1952 until 1980, Marguerite Wildenhain presided over a community entirely of her own making, a summer program devoted to the discipline of ceramics, admired for its uncompromising rigor and pursuit of the craftsman ideal. Wildenhain's ideology was entirely process-driven. Over 8 or 12 weeks, students threw 500 or 600 pots and left with nothing. By, quote, purging her students of the desire to produce finished pots, unquote, Wildenhain set her students on a course of non-object production. This is a radical reformulation of pottery, redirecting it away from its traditional object-based orientation in favor of process. If you're a student in my class, or most pottery classes, your teacher most likely tries to guide you through non-attachment in the early stages of your making. Though a common practice now, this was directly counter to the practices of Wildenhain's time. Thus, at Pond Farm, ceramics became a live form valued not as a commodity, but as an experience. Pond Farm, unlike Black Mountain College, willfully lacks institutional status. Without any kind of accreditation or degree structure, it had no credibility within the larger American education system. And this was intentional. Wildenhain said, Pond Farm is not a school. It is actually a way of life. Wildenhain's history functioned as an allegory of illegibility. She was misinterpreted again and again by her American, predominantly male colleagues who could not understand why she would not seek accreditation or elevation of her ceramic program, even though they benefited from her pedagogy. Wildenhain's career is a case study in the gender inequity and media hierarchies that plagued women artists, even those with the best training in the mid-century. She represents a series of exclusions: a Bauhaus-trained Jew, a refugee, a woman in the elite reaches of her male-dominated profession, and a proclaimed and self-proclaimed master. But neither Wildenhain nor any other Bauhaus-affiliated woman, not even Annie Albers, ever attained an artistic stature equivalent to that of their male counterparts, whose mediums were viewed as, quote, not intellectual enough, unquote. Under Wildenhain, Pond Farm exerted a profound influence on the ceramic field in the mid-20th century, primarily through its emphasis on community. This influence manifested in several key areas, shaping not just the trajectory of ceramics, but also contributing to a broader cultural and educational dialogue within the arts community at large. The impact of Pond Farm's community-centric approach is seen in the fostering of a ceramics network, the promotion of ceramics as a serious art form, and the establishment of a model for arts education that has had lasting effects on the field. The last artist I want to look at this evening is Susan Peterson, who brought clay to an audience beyond the classroom. Located on the West Coast and initially in California, Peterson created and starred in a 54-episode television series titled Wheels, Kilns, and Clay in the 1950s. During this time, visual artists were returning towards production work or commenting on the industrial landscape, think pop art. Earlier in this lecture, we discussed the importance of ceramics moving from industrial production to individual studio creation. In the 60s, we saw a push from visual artists back to production, like Andy Warhol. These artists transformed the artist side of production from the studio into a theoretical and critical sphere that was both nomadic and unfixed, one that altered the private studio. By the 1960s, ceramics was an outmoded technology, searching for a wider audience beyond its own professionals. Hobbyist ceramicists had always sustained the field, as Pond Farm demonstrates. A television audience was a perfect adaptation for the social audience who had been primed for the ceramic process through the popular cooking show format, pioneered by Julia Child. And if you recall from earlier in this lecture, women ceramicists have primarily functioned as the teachers, demonstrators, and the scholars of the field. Peterson began her artistic career as a painter, studying art as an undergraduate at Mills College. She graduated in 1946 and went to earn an MFA in ceramics at Alfred University in 1950 before meeting her husband, ceramic engineer Carlton Ball. Peterson is credited as the first educator to introduce Alfred-style traditional ceramics curriculum to the West Coast. And that matters because in ceramics, we're all connected. We have a straight lineage all the way back to Alfred and then back to England. As an accomplished potter, Peterson's own work is rooted in domestically scaled functional wares, such as bottle, seen here. Textured with a shower of black speckles that rain down upon the surface of a smooth and shiny red glaze, this small vase is an object to hold rather than behold. Don't you want to put your fingers in the dimples? It's really nice. Peterson reflects on this time saying, quote, "When we were young, ceramics as we know it today was also young. Most of us began as painters or had other occupations and found clay in some sort of epiphany," unquote. Peterson's epiphany became her ability to utilize the ceramic process as a locus for experiencing and building community beyond the confinement of a master-student lineage, as a structuring device for non-hierarchical and participatory experiences. Through her lifelong commitment to non-traditional education, Peterson was instrumental in promoting the non-hierarchical nature of studio pottery. In 1972, she began writing the curriculum version of her television series, Wheels, Kilns, and Clay, and began writing monographs and surveys of the ceramic field, 10 in all. She also wrote a number of volumes and exhibition catalogs on Native American and indigenous potters. As a ceramic artist, Peterson experimented with brushy and expressionist glazed chemistries, such as in an undated vessel form, seen here, this one on this side. But she never drifted towards sculpture. She was, by contrast, process-rich, reveling in technical instruction as a means of resuscitating clay as a vastly humanistic medium. One of the key reasons why Peterson's work as both a potter and television host was crucial for the success of the ceramic field in the mid-century was her ability to demystify the art form. Through her television show, she provided viewers with a behind-the-scenes look at the ceramic process, from wheel throwing to kiln firing. This accessibility helped make ceramics more approachable for aspiring artists and enthusiasts, and the exposure not only elevated the visibility of ceramic artists, but also inspired a new generation of practitioners to explore the medium with creativity and innovation. Broadcast through 1964 and 65, Wheels, Kilns, and Clay spanned 54 distinct episodes and screened in half-hour segments once a week. The show was produced in Los Angeles by a CBS-owned and operated station. Peterson described the process by saying, quote, "There wasn't really a public television at the time, and CBS was feeling that they needed some educational kind of program. They started with a Shakespeare lecture by one of the USC faculty, and that was very successful. And then CBS decided they wanted a more visual program. They came, we talked, and I thought this is going to be a terrific opportunity," unquote. An interesting consideration of wheels, kilns, and clay is that the show was filmed and taught in a kitchen-like setting, a space that is not typically associated with ceramics, yet a space that is historically associated with women. Peterson's show, a process-based educational television program taking place in a kitchen, destabilizes both the origins of the post-studio in the 1960s, which denigrates hand labor in favor of an industrial aesthetic, and it predates symbolic and gendered associations of the kitchen in the decade that followed. The 1970s specifically, when the kitchen became the iconic site of women's universal oppression. Peterson's kitchen is a proto-feminist space that one can argue anticipates early feminist performance art, and in particular, stages a specific set of values about form. The show served an educational purpose at a time when access to art education, particularly in specialized fields like ceramics, was limited in public schools and even at the university level. Peterson, leveraging her deep expertise and passion for ceramics, offered viewers detailed demonstrations of techniques, discussions on the history of pottery, and insights into contemporary ceramic arts. This educational content was not only novel, but deeply engaging for audiences who had little exposures to the intricacies of the craft. Peterson's show reached a broad audience, from professional potters and art students to hobbyists and those with general interest in crafts. This wide appeal was significant in building a diverse community of ceramic enthusiasts and practitioners. By showcasing the accessibility of pottery making and emphasizing the joy and fulfillment derived from this art form, Peterson encouraged many viewers to start or continue their own exploration into ceramics. And one interesting contemporary note about this, in comparing Peterson as a television host bringing ceramics to the public, is today's YouTube and social media platforms and how they bring ceramics to the greater collective. In conclusion, the collectivity and artistic practice that has flourished in the modern and contemporary ceramic field could not have occurred without the pedagogical networks put in motion by craftswomen of the mid-century. Their relentless experimentation has gone largely unnoticed because they produce not from the inside, but beside and alongside other modernist practices. Women have performed the unacknowledged labor of craft. That is not just the making of objects, but crafting entire programs and curriculum, sometimes at the expense of professional recognition, but in service to their own autonomy. Rather than canonization, what many women craftsmen achieve is self-sufficiency, a living wage, a modest artistic career, and the respect of one's peers. Post-war American ceramics provided women with a platform to assert their creativity and agency in a rapidly changing world. Through their innovative work and advocacy efforts, women ceramicists helped to elevate ceramics from a domestic craft to a respected art form. Their legacy, either through teaching or artistic legacy, continues to inspire future generations of artists, demonstrating the transformative power of artistic expression and shaping society and culture. There are many fabulous makers and creators who we have not touched on or even discussed this evening, but I hope through this lecture you have learned something new about women ceramic artists or modern craftsmen and how they brought forward new ideas and spaces for ceramic art that was not gendered or deemed other, but a powerful creative space that embodies the ideas of modern art. And if you would like further reading or research, may you consider an artist from this list. Cheers to making, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So we have time for a Q&A, and I would actually love to kick it off. As a potter and a colleague, and seeing the studio community you've built here at the college, and knowing as the director of the Greenwald Guild how have these women inspired the intentionality that you bring to creating community pottery studio spaces?
Thank you. That's a fun question. I would say I'm deeply inspired by Betty Woodman, who I've mentioned a few times in this lecture. And she's very explorative in her forms. My master's research was on Betty Woodman and how she brought ceramics from the pedestal, that is a display, to the wall, which you don't normally see ceramics on the wall. And I think that has really stuck with me in how I approach ceramics as a teacher of what can we explore in the medium. In a medium that is very explorative and process-based, there's so much still to touch, but also so much that has already been done. So I like to approach things in a similar ethos to Betty Woodman and just playing around, seeing what happens. But I very much bring that to my teaching here at the college.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we're ready for your questions or comments that you'd like to share. So just raise your hand and Scott or I will bring you the mic.
My question is, I'm very new to ceramics and pottery, but I am not new to this valley. I grew up here, and I know that there's a huge, obviously, Native American influence to a lot of the sculptures and art that we see throughout the valley. Mm-hmm. But because I don't know anything really about ceramics, is there a big Native influence, or is that not necessarily as big in the ceramic world as it is in like beading culture or other types of hands-on art?
Yeah, that's a complicated question, I think. Certainly. There's definitely an indigenous lineage here in our valley, and ceramics is always at the heart of that. That's why I mentioned in ancient civilizations, you're always studying the first things they made out of clay. And so I'm not familiar with that history here. I'd love to become more familiar with it, but definitely ceramics has always been alive in this valley in many ways, and it's, I think, special to see the current iteration of it, but I would love to know more about the past. So I'm sorry I don't have a direct answer to that question, but I'm glad as your teacher that you were asking those questions. Yeah.
We have a question over here.
Yes, I'm honored to call you colleague, and also too, I was very impressed with your presentation. This is a selfless or selfish plug. Would you allow colleagues to take your classes?
Please, that's my favorite. I learn so much when colleagues take the class. Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you.
We have a question over here.
In the practice of non-attachment at Pond Farm, what would happen to the 500 or so pieces produced by the students? I noticed there were some laid into a path, but that's a tremendous amount of work to fire or not fire.
That's a really fun question. I think I would like to take a soil sample at Pond Farm to see what it is like, because I have a suspicion that pots just kind of disintegrated places. That is something to keep an eye on. And also there was a body of water, and potters have this innate sensibility within them to just chuck pots into water, which is terrible probably for the environment. So I don't know. I know a lot of it was recycled at Pond Farm. One thing I didn't get to discuss is how involved the kiln maintenance and kiln building process was in the program. It was a huge part of the program, unlike we've seen in other artist communities, specifically ceramic communities. So I know there's a lot of recycling, but yes, some were kind of laid out. I'd like to test the soil.
We have a question up front.
Do you expect your students to have that degree of non-attachment? Because I'm thinking about it and thinking, I don't think I could throw a whole bunch of pots. Well, I couldn't because I don't know how, but even if I could, I think I'd get attached and I'd want to have them fired and keep them.
Yes, absolutely. It's something, ceramics is known for being a humbling medium. It's something where you put a lot of time and energy into learning, and when you're really bad at it, you're really bad at it, and that's my favorite part of the process with students. But Yes, certainly. I joke, but also take seriously that a lot of my job when I'm teaching real throwing is emotional regulation of students because of that attachment and throwing. And you've worked so hard to just pull something up, and we're currently in the process right now. Some of the folks in the room might be able to speak to their own non-attachment, but I also am human, so I do let students keep their work, but I kind of get a sense of, do not keep this work up. I know you're going to make better things in the future, but also you can use test pieces too. So it's a very balanced act of non-attachment. I certainly don't make students make 600 pieces, but they'd probably learn a lot.
I'm one of Sarah's students, and I just wanted to thank her for being my liaison into the art. The cool thing that I've learned about ceramics is that it's really more than one form of art combined. It's sculpture and it's painting, and I'm just looking forward to continuing my journey with Sarah into the art.
Thanks, Frank. And you are quite successful in that journey already, so that's awesome. Appreciate being here.
I have another question, sorry. What does community mean to you in a community studio? I think you have students here and I think some members of the guild, and just from seeing you in action, you really create a really positive studio setting. So how do you do that?
Well, the community space makes itself. I love to talk about ceramic history. I love to be in a community ceramic studio, but what makes a ceramic studio so special is how collaborative and communal it is. We share usually the same clay. We share the same tools. We share the same glazes. Ceramics and pottery is really challenging to do siloed on your own. A lot of people do that as well. But there's quite a life and a buzz to being in a community studio. So it's definitely not something that I am bringing forward alone, or that I would ever say that I'm doing. But I fully believe in that immersion, and that special spark that comes forward in the ceramic studio, and the art form leans into that. So I try to foster that. But it's not hard to do. Yes.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Can you speak to using beautiful pieces, like, pieces you're really pleased with or that might be considered, like better than other ones? Should these, pieces be used or like stored on a shelf?
Oh, like when they're finished? And
Yeah, like a finished product. Like, how do you both like respect the, finesse of the piece, but also let pottery remain functional?
Yeah, good question too. I think you can tell if someone's been in a pottery class because they often, whatever vessel they have, cup, bowl, plate, they pick it up and they look at the bottom. And when you're taking a pottery class, maybe you know that this is a thing, maybe you don't, but it just it comes over you. You don't know when it's going to happen, but you're going to pick up that cup and you're going to look at the bottom and you're like, oh my gosh, the pottery spirit is within me. And in part, it's because of our curiosity for those forms, because we've been making them, but because they're beautiful. And so it's really special to have an art form where it is craft. We are making these functional objects. And there's a lot of potters in the room that maybe could speak to their own experience, but I know my life is made much more abundant through using beautiful things that more often than not, people that I love or admire have made rather than just myself. And yeah, I love opening my kitchen cabinets and seeing what's inside. Mm-hmm.
Any final thoughts or comments or questions? We have one right here.
I just want to say, I went into ceramics already having had taken the class my high school year, but I was a little afraid coming back into it. And honestly, I truly do enjoy the way that you teach and the way that you support each individual student. I have taken moments to just observe you as a teacher, and I am so happy that you are the person that is teaching the class. I'm just grateful that you've always been there no matter what and have always come with this positive attitude. because of course I go in there with a negative attitude, just not wanting to do certain things, but you always just find a way to cheer each individual person up. And so I'm just genuinely really glad that you are the one teaching the class.
Yeah, big sword.
Well, I don't think we can top that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you so
Thank you so
much.
much. Yeah, thank you. Thank you all so much for listening and hanging in there about all those different topics. So I appreciate it. Come take a class.
Thank you guys so much for coming. There's food and water outside. Please have some refreshments and conversation and come back again.
Thank you. I'd love to have you at the studio.
To take your class, absolutely.
That would be awesome.
Yes. This quarter I'm taking fly fishing, but I would love to do.
That's awesome. That's a really good decision. But I'm sure it's limited free time. Yeah, yes, exactly. Whoops. Awesome.
I do love that you pointed out that you are not located in the art building. I did notice that.
Yeah, and it's not, I don't think of it in any particular way, but also